Lift up your eyes and fix them on the place beyond the horizon to which you are sent. Journey in trust, assured that the great and marvellous work is for this time and for all time. These words in Doctrine and Covenants, section 161, were presented to the church over 25 years ago now. Yet they still, even now, ring in my ears and speak to me personally. Now, I was not in the room when these were first shared with the church or approved. I cannot even recall when or where I was exactly the first time that I heard them. But this scripture is a core part of my journey. The phrases are part of my story, and they guide me in how I faithfully live out my discipleship. For me, the words in the Doctrine and Covenants are the ever unfolding scripture that each of us are a part of living within this very moment. These give us an insight and a direction as to what we as disciples are to focus on. The what helps us focus and gives us purpose in this very moment. And as disciples of Christ, we look to the gospel scriptures to help inform us about how we go about living that direction and purpose. Challenging, speaking, and acting out against inequality. Becoming like servants. Offering blessing and peace to another household. Inviting others to partner together at the sacred table. The stories and ministry of Jesus are the examples of how we can live our life because we have been transformed by the blessings of God in our life. The Doctrine and Covenants are the what, Jesus is the how. Section 161 continues. Claim your unique and sacred place within the circle of those who call upon the name of Jesus Christ. Be faithful to the spirit of this restoration, mindful that it is a spirit of adventure, openness, and searching. Walk proudly with a quickened step. Be a joyful people. Laugh and play and sing, embodying the hope and the freedom of the gospel. A few years ago, that spirit of adventure, embodying the hope of the gospel, led me to the Philippines, a country in Southeast Asia where the Community of Christ has a number of congregations, as well as an organisation called CORD. CORD's catchphrase is, helping others help themselves. They are an organisation dedicated to sustainable human development that is directed by a full-time World Church minister, and many programs have been strongly supported by the Oblation Tangible Love Fund over many years. The ministry they share is intrinsically integrated with the ministry of the church. It was about halfway through our time there. We rose early as our journey by car to visit some of these CORD ministries began at 6 a.m. Hour after hour, we drove the main single-lane highway through the country, often passing through small villages that had these large plastic tarps spread out to the very edges of the road. And every square inch of these tarps were covered, drying out the family's rice in the blazing sun, the rice that had just been harvested. We met with some wonderful ministries that day, but there is one particular village whose story I want to share with you. After many hours on the road, late in the afternoon, we turned off the highway onto a small, single-lane concreted road. Pure, deep green, lush rice fields extended out in every direction for miles and miles until they finally hit the base of the far-off mountains. As we bumped our way along the track, we then eventually pulled up to this small village of houses. And in this village were maybe 20 small, simple houses, each one very modest in size, with only just a few rooms. And right in the middle of this village, there was a humble Community of Christ chapel. On the lawn beside the church, it seemed like the entire community had gathered. Not just church members, but all members of the community were sitting around in a large circle awaiting for our arrival. They had not come simply to meet us, but they had come because they yearned to share their story. The leader stood up and began to explain that due to assistance from Cord and the church, their community was encouraged to become self-empowered and as a result set up a microfinance program to help the members of their community. He explained that the interest rates are so high in the Philippines and a lot of people in these smaller villages simply cannot afford to get a bank loan. And for those that can afford to get a bank loan, often it's virtually impossible to pay it back in their lifetime. But with our help, the people in the village can borrow small amounts of money with little interest to help them out of poverty. Well, the leader had hardly finished speaking and was still in the process of sitting down when the first man shot up out of his seat. He couldn't wait to share his story. He said, "Today, I want to tell you how I turned a pig into a wedding." Yes, that's right, a pig into my wedding. To be officially married here in the Philippines is very expensive, but with the help of the program, I was able to borrow enough to get a small piglet. And then I cared for it like a child. And I nurtured that piglet until it was old enough to then have its own babies. And then I grew them. And through this process, I not only paid back the money I borrowed, but I could also then make enough money to be able to afford our wedding. Almost immediately as he began to sit down, a lady then stood up. She said, "I want to tell you how I turned a cow into my house." There was another person, a sack of rice seed into many bags of rice, into school books for my children. And around the circle we went, with story after story being shared. Some sharing with these huge smiles as they beamed about their achievements. Others had tears falling down their face as they spoke about the real difference this community had made in their lives. And I will tell you now, the overwhelming presence of God that was felt as those experiences were shared will stay forever with me. Those faces remind me to journey in trust and be assured that the great and marvelous work is for this time and for all time. Small acts that seem so incredibly simple, yet something miraculously sacred. Yet today, we may not find ourselves in a small village in the middle of rice fields. And so the questions beg of you as you approach this table here today, as you engage in the simple act of sharing a little bit of bread and a sip of juice, do you see this moment as miraculously sacred? A moment of connection to the divine, a moment of reconciliation, a moment of remembering why it is you are present here today. As you generously respond to the oblation, can you see how that will transform people's lives? Christ greets us at this table. And the Spirit once again calls us to come, eat, drink, and claim your unique and sacred place within the circle and be faithful to the spirit of the restoration. But there's one more thing. This table where Christ invites you is also asking for you to then go out and respond. God is calling you to lift up your eyes and consider the simple things that each of you do as a disciple, to bring impact and meaning and sacred connection to others' lives. Community of Christ. A divine vision is set before you. Presented over the years through various inspired phrases and symbols, it is now expressed through initiatives in harmony with Jesus Christ's mission. As a spiritual venture, boldly follow the initiatives into the heart of God's vision for the church and creation. Then, in response to growing insight about God's nature and will, continue to shape communities that live Christ's love and mission. Lovingly invite others to experience the good news of new life in community with Christ. Opportunities abound in your daily lives if you choose to see them. Undertake compassionate and just actions to abolish poverty and end needless suffering. Pursue peace on and for the earth. Friends, come to this table because I know it has transformed the lives of so many others. And I have faith that it is transforming yours. And I'm assured it will transform many others who will join with us. What will you do, and how will you do it?